All right, seems like the majority of us are all back. So we will return to open session at 7:16 p.m. Changes to the agenda were, we pulled item 7E, 7I, and 7J. And for closed session, nothing to report for 3A, and discussion was held and direction was given for 3B. So that will take us to item 5, which is the approval of the minutes. So if no one has any questions or changes, I think A and B are one and the same. August 27th it's listed as. So I'll entertain a motion to approve that.
I'll make a motion. Go
You
ahead,
got it.
Jan. No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve items 5A, 5B, the minutes for August 27th, 2020.
I'll second.
Awesome, thank you both. Roll call, please.
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
Aye.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyana,
She's here.
Aye.
Trustee Shibomahin.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 5-0, and I believe B is just a duplicate. So we will.
No, one is a special and one is the regular.
Right.
Remember,
Oh.
the same day, we just had a special meeting and a regular.
Thank you. I'm like, why am I seeing that? All right, so I'll entertain a motion for 5B.
I think she did both.
Yeah, I
okay.
did.
She
Great.
did both in that motion.
Great. No problem. Sounds good to me. All right, let's go from the floor. Are there any speakers? Anyone that would like to speak, please raise your hand. And we'll select you.
No one's raising their hand.
All right, so then let's keep going. We will now go to the consent agenda. The first item that was pulled was 7E, and that was both by staff and Trustee Wilson. So Cindy, I think you had noted that there would be a change in the date to,
Yes, the MOU in front of you now updates the date from September 11th to September 18th. There was some difficulty in the number of RSVPs, and so the Bloom House wanted to extend out the event to another week to try and get more RSVPs.
awesome. And Trustee Wilson, did you have a question about?
No, I don't have a question. I have to recuse myself because I'm working through One East Palo Alto on a project of Emerson.
Got it. Okay. Well, there you go. I didn't know that. All right. So I will entertain a motion to approve item 7E.
I make a motion to approve item 17E. Did I get it right?
Yeah, 7E is correct. And I will second that. Roll call, please.
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
I recuse myself.
that's right. Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyona,
Aye.
Trustee Shibomihin.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries 4-0. And Trustee Wilson. All right. 7I as in ice. And that was also from staff, I believe.
Yes, I pulled that item to state that I had received an updated quote from NWA for use of the map assessment, reducing the cost to $8,370. Are there any questions?
No,
Great.
I think Trustee Pluto might be frozen.
I think so. Are you there, Anna? No. Yeah, she's dropped.
Do we want to wait, Trustee Wilson, before we take a vote?
oh, what happened?
Anna,
Anna got dropped.
Mhm.
See, that's East Palo Alto. We need hotspots. I can call the question. Yeah. So if there aren't any other questions, on I, then I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve item 7I.
Thank you.
I second it.
Hello.
There you are. Okay. So we're just calling the question.
All right. Are we voting on? Did we
Yeah,
make?
we're getting ready to vote now.
All right. Do you want to finish it off, Trustee Wilson?
Yeah, I did. I'm waiting for Gina to tally the votes.
All right, here we go. President Polito,
Aye, if we're still on item 7I.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vice President Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyona,
Aye.
Trustee Shibomihin.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 5-0. Trustee Wilson, I'll ask you to do 7J, given that I'm recusing myself completely.
Correct. Okay, then are there any questions on item 7J, the MOU with the Sequoia High School District? Hearing none, then I'll entertain a motion for approval of item 7J.
I'll make a motion to approve item 7J.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Roll call.
All right, Vice President Wilson,
Yes.
Trustee Fitch,
Yes.
Trustee Guyona,
Yes.
Trustee Shibomihin.
Yes.
With a note that Trustee Pulido has recused herself. Okay. Back to you.
Thank you, Trustee Wilson. All right, that takes us to the rest of the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. All
I second.
right, roll call, please. Thank
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
Aye.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyona,
Aye.
Trustee Shibomihi.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 5-0, and that will allow us to move to the superintendent's office, and we'll turn it over to Superintendent Sadaria for her superintendent's report.
All right. Solomon, I think I'm going to try to share my screen if I have access.
Yes, you do.
All right. Anna Maria, can you give me thumbs up if you see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So staff is going to give an update on our distance learning. And we will be covering information about our attendance and engagement data also around parent survey data. We will reference the learning continuity plan. Special education will give an update on assessments, and then technology will also give us an update on some statistics in regards to devices. So more than ever, we must ensure that we attend to our mental health and stay connected as much as possible during distance teaching and learning while we face the myriad of challenges brought on by the racial and health crises. This is why the Ravenswood City School District focused on launching the school year with a smart start, because we recognize the importance of building relationships with students and families. So during the first 2 weeks of school, teachers and staff have put forth majority of their effort during the regular instructional time to build positive rapport with students and families, practice routines and procedures for logging into and using the district's learning management system and other district approved applications, and develop instructional routines as a strong foundation for instruction. If for any reason we have not been able to connect, we encourage families to contact their child's school directly. And our admin assistants have been, I would call them our first responders to the needs of our families, especially around the technology protocol for support. Our families are to contact our school offices. Our admin assistants are prepared to address and direct where and how they can get technology support. So staff will review engagement and participation data through our multi-tier support system process at each grade level, site and district level. We will use this information to strategize how to engage students and families and provide the necessary resources to keep our families connected and students learning throughout the school year. We understand that these are challenging times and empathize with the anxiety many parents are feeling. We heard from families during the advisory committee held on September 3rd, specifically about how district did during the launch of school and how we could improve family engagement. So several parents mentioned that text messages worked best for them, while another mentioned that the Parent Score app worked well because they could communicate directly with the person who is corresponding with them. Parents shared challenges with connectivity. So one shared that there wasn't a problem with the actual internet, but the bandwidth is tapped when they have 5 children using the Wi-Fi connection at once. And another shared that they had challenges logging in, but then figured out how to connect during their child's class schedule. So our next steps is our department leads and school improvement task force have received this feedback and information from our families and will continue to mitigate solutions to respond to the needs of our community. We will provide an update and additional solutions to address concerns around childcare and academic support in this presentation. The learning continuity plan will also update you on how we are providing supports to families. And then the Learning Hub presentation will also share with you how we're going to address childcare supervision. So, also just I want to emphasize the need to have that two-way communication, and it's imperative during this time. And it seems that even in light of technology, we must realize too that we can revert just back to basic phone calls if the going gets tough. So right now we're going to be able to share additional information since the first day of school, starting with our Student Services Department. And Cindy Chin, our director, will start us off.
Yeah, so for the first day of classes on August 26th, we had 1,240 students attend, which meant 72% of our students. And obviously that's not a number that we want to celebrate, in the sense that we want to improve our attendance. And so from that time, our staff, from teachers, office staff, and district office staff, have been calling families, making sure that the links that we sent to families for Zoom were working links, making sure that families had the correct schedule so that they knew when to get online or when to access different things. We passed out additional devices. For some people, they needed a new power cord, or they at one point needed to just change out their laptop because it wasn't holding the charge anymore. The tech department set up drop-in hours a couple days a week so that families could get some tech support. And then we've also, because of all of that outreach, have been able to update our enrollment. And so from this past Friday, you can see an increase there of students attending, now to 1,430 students, to about 82%. And we're still pushing to try and get back up to our normal 94, 95% attendance goals because of the switch from Smart Start to now full instruction. Your families are going to see more of a regular day. And I think that will improve some of our attendance. We are still calling families to check in. We are using the attendance and engagement spreadsheets to determine which families need home visits. So there's lots of different things that we want to make sure to try and get to, like I said, up to the typical 94, 95% that we have. If you go to the next slide, you can see, from our surveying, there's still families that we haven't been able to reach out to just to do the survey. And if you look at the number, we've had 990 families do the survey. I would estimate about 740 of those that did the survey were because we called them and then did the survey with the families, right? Wow. So we need to make sure that we are supporting our families with the technology and how to access things, and just getting used to the idea that, if we send you a link or you've signed up to Parent Square, and we send you the schedule, that click the link and that will get you onto the class, as opposed to some more of the hand holding where we're calling you to do the thing with us. And the next slide shows the percentage of families who still need more stable internet. The blue part of the circle saying have stable internet includes those families that have internet, but also includes families that received hotspots from the district. So we're still looking at 280 from this time of the survey of 286 needing hotspots or some type of internet support. And that has not been updated from when the initial survey was done and when tech department passed out more devices. But I will say anecdotally, more of the more recent surveys that have been completed, the families actually do have internet or have mentioned that they have the hotspots from the district. And then looking at our childcare needs, you can see there in the blue, the families indicated that 419 students would need childcare, 197 said they weren't sure, and then 855 said that they did not need any childcare. And then assuming that we would be able to come back to a hybrid model, we asked for family preferences, and still we're seeing a larger preference for the Tuesday, Thursday model. And then closely followed behind by the preferring to do distance learning and not sending their child to school until, for safety and health reasons.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, so Lotta Burden, our curriculum and instruction director, will address the next few slides.
Thank you, Gina. So one update we wanted to share was a little more detail around how we're tracking attendance and student engagement. That's part of our obligation with state guidelines regarding distance learning this year. And we have a slightly different system set up for TK through 5th grade compared with 6-8. So in TK5, teachers have an attendance log that shows both synchronous and asynchronous learning for each student for each day in the week. They're monitoring students' participation in synchronous learning throughout the day because their students will see their teachers multiple times. And then also looking at asynchronous assignment completion. And they're able to mark in that spreadsheet whether the student's participation is full, partial, or none. And then the spreadsheet is set up in a way that actually determines the percentage of engagement that students have in the week with both of those components put together. And then Eric Edwards, our data and assessment coordinator, was able to pull those spreadsheets and that data into our Tableau data system. And that will allow teachers and principals to look at the data more easily to see the students' participation through the week and also look at week over week participation. So for example, if a student is participating at 90 to 100% in weeks 1 through 4, but then there's a drop off and they go below 60%, for example, in weeks 5 and 6, we'll have a really clear record of that and be able to look for patterns and make sure to be in communication with families right away. In TK through 5th grade, we're tracking student learning in a few different ways. So we have a range of assessments that we'll be administering shortly for our beginning of the year assessment period. And then also looking at day-to-day formative assessments in key content areas and tracking student response to instruction over time. On the 6-8 side, it's a little different. So synchronous learning is tracked through attendance in Infinite Campus, much as it would be in in-person instruction. And the attendance there is period attendance. So it actually gives you a picture of that full or partial by looking at that data in IC. Asynchronous learning is then tracked through gradebook because teachers are marking both participation and grading assignments that are done asynchronously. The next slide references our learning continuity and attendance plan, which I'll be presenting at another point in the board agenda this evening to introduce the public hearing to see if we have any public comment or questions regarding our plan. So more to come on that.
Thank you, Lotta. And now Jennifer Grabham, our Director of Special Education, will address some assessments in special ed.
I get to start with some really good news. Since our last board meeting, all of our PPE has come in. So all of the teachers, the special educators, speech and language teachers, psychologists, occupational therapists have a kit ready to set up their clean rooms at their site. That'll be 35 rooms between our 4 sites to allow for one-on-one assessments in as safe of a way as possible. So this is our example here at the district office. We'll have multiple rooms like this at each of our school sites. So I just wanted to share that good news. If we could go to the next slide. Then President Polito had asked about the number of assessments that we have and what our projection is to be able to catch up to current with all of the backlog of assessments. So I did a grid here that gives us an idea of the assessments that we need to complete by each school site from 1920. And those are the assessments that should have been held between the one-on-one assessments that should have been conducted between March and June when we were on distance learning and we could not bring the students in because of shelter in place. And then The next grid on the bottom is the assessments that need to be completed that we know about between August and December by each school site. It does vary because it's a very unpredictable thing when students will have their triennial assessment or when they were initially assessed. The unknowns are new requests. We don't know when new requests for assessment are going to come in, which can impact our larger picture. So we have 58 assessments to catch up on. And if we did an average of 11 assessments per psychologist, which means 3 additional assessments per month per person, we can be caught up to right on target by December. So I'm really excited to kind of dig through that math and have a real concrete plan of how we move forward. And you'll notice that I said an average of 11 per psychologist because our psychologists are assigned to particular sites. And you'll see that some sites are heavier than other sites. And so we can balance between and share the assessment queue amongst all 5 psychologists. If we'll slide to the next slide. One of the things I also did was I met with County Council about what is the best way to approach assessment right now for our students with special needs. And so we created a decision tree to decide what is the best way to assess our students with special needs and whether we should complete a complete in-person assessment or a combination of in-person and virtual or completely virtual. For all of our new assessments, we will be doing a complete in-person assessment because that's the only way we can get a real true picture of a learning need. We would also do an in-person assessment for any students who we think their disability category may change. For any of our students who we anticipate things to be very similar, we would be able to do an assessment that is a records review, observation, interviews, some online assessments, and we wouldn't have to bring students or staff in person. We're trying to balance between validity of assessment and safety of our students. So this was the advice we got from County Council for how to move forward, which makes that number of assessments more attainable to get to by December. So if we'll go to the next slide. So if we were out of school for about 3.5 months, and if we complete these assessments by December, we basically double time it and can pick up those 3.5 months in 3.5 months. So we are hoping to be even and caught up and have a better 2021 than a 2020. And that's all for me.
Thank you, Jen. And now our Director of Technology, Solomon, will give us a brief update.
Next slide. So I'm going to update you about student device handouts and just quickly talk about the infrastructure projects we're also working on. On the next slide, you can see statistics showing you basically an update since we last met. All the devices that we've handed out through the beginning of this week. We continue to hand them out, but since Tuesday, it's tapered off a lot, thank goodness. It's been a multi-department collaboration. We've handed out about 370 Chromebooks, over 330 hotspots, which is interesting because we are actually out of hotspots now. We still get a couple trickle in every day from families who are actually attending other schools or moving out in the community. But essentially we are out, and so we now have a waiting list on hotspots. I'm going to talk about that more, and connectivity. And we also handed out iPads to all the TK through second graders. Second graders, so you know, don't normally use iPads, but because they haven't gone to the classroom, that's our transition here to Chromebooks. They are still using iPads, and then when they come to the classroom, teachers will teach them to type and use Chromebooks. So let's go to the next slide. This just shows you by school site, essentially, what the device numbers, and it's all combined devices, Chromebooks, hotspots, iPads, etc. But it gives you a sense of the need for this school year. Again, these numbers do not include last year's, what we handed out and students retained. So we have a lot more devices. We have a total of about 800 hotspots out there right now, and we're out of them. So we have purchased 225 more from Verizon, which is the provider that has been providing 500 of our hotspots. The other 275 were a donation from the county, and they're on the T-Mobile network. And it's a good thing to have a couple options, because sometimes we can switch. If someone doesn't get a good Verizon signal, we can swap out a hotspot. The big challenge, the new big challenge, because there have been a number of challenges, is that it looks like Verizon has started enforcing their one of their policies. So they have a policy about we're on unlimited plans for our hotspots. However, unlimited doesn't always mean unlimited. So students, when they reach 25 gig, we're seeing for the first time, because we weren't seeing this last year, that they are starting to throttle when their network is full. So their official policy is we have the option to throttle if you're past 25 gig, even though it's an unlimited plan, and the network is congested. And so we're getting evidence from families that they are indeed doing that. So that's causing a problem. One of the things that we talked to Verizon, and we're working on a solution for these new hotspots, is if we set up what's called, and we're working with the provider to set up a virtual private network from Verizon through our network that would actually utilize our district bandwidth. So, and then Verizon will not throttle these new hotspots. So the new hotspots will ship on the September 18th. So we'll get them a couple days later if the post office is working efficiently. And they won't be throttled like the existing ones. And we can, once we have proven that, we can, at additional cost, potentially move the existing hotspots to an unthrottled plan through the VPN, though we haven't fully engineered that solution for the existing hotspots. I know it's complicated. These bandwidth issues get complicated. The other thing we're doing, we're just starting, is the Comcast solution. Through the county, we received 275 codes for free Comcast Internet Essentials for families for 14 months. And so we're just starting to aggressively get that information out there. And because it's a complicated process, we know the schools are gonna have to work with families. And so we're finalizing that plan. Some schools have their own internal plan, but we're finalizing a district-wide plan to make sure we provide the kind of support so families can move to have actual broadband during this period for 14 months. So that's an update about the devices. I'm sure you're gonna have questions, but the infrastructure part I wanted to touch on because we're now in really starting full construction mode at Castaño, taking advantage of the fact that students aren't around, and we're starting the wiring and getting things up and going for our future network at that school site. Bellhaven will be next, but that won't start until mid-October. And those are my updates.
Thank you. Superintendent Sidari, that's the full presentation, correct?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you for that presentation to staff and putting that together and giving an update since school started. I will open it up for comments or questions from the board. Could you, I don't know if I can see everybody.
I can stop the screen.
So does anyone have any questions or comments? The only question I have is related to technology. So in one of the graphs, it said nearly 30% do not have stable internet, correct, Solomon?
I'm not sure. Cindy, when was that snapshot taken? Because I don't think that's...
So that's been ongoing. So as I was mentioning, the survey opened at the beginning of August. And so some of the families that had initially marked that they did not have internet have now gotten internet through the hotspots.
Okay.
Yeah, we've given 330 of them out. So
I wonder how we could get like more updated information, especially given, because your survey with your numbers was the part I was having trouble.
what we can
So
what we can do is we can correlate the yes answers, and we just haven't had time to do that data crunching. We know who we've given them to, but we haven't matched, like, you know, and taken people off.
would you be able to give us an estimate of how many maybe students' families you believe still do not have either a hotspot or stable internet?
Yeah, Cindy collected enough data, so we could do that. We can do it by their name.
That'd be great to get an idea and then see who we could partner with to help expedite this, especially given that school's already started. And I'm highly concerned that some students are going to fall very much behind. And that goes back to maybe what staff may find annoying, me bringing up packets, right? Delivering school packets, allowing family to pick up school packets so they can follow along the workload without having to fall behind while we get a lot of this other things situated with internet connectivity and any other issues. And then the other thing I was going to say, I know, Solomon, you say when you hand out devices, don't just hand them out, you kind of show families and students how to use them, correct?
Yeah, and how to log in, and we provide as much support as we think they need at the time.
I wonder if we could partner up with Job Train, and then as parents, we go home and are still struggling. I know they have like a very like introductory kind of like how to use a computer. And I wonder if it'd be helpful to see if we could partner with them and have parents fill out a survey, say, are you still kind of struggling navigating, you know, using the internet, using your computer at home, helping your student with online distance learning, and then, you know, provide that information to Job Train so we can connect parents to that resource and have them get, you know, more further proper training that they might need to be able to kind of like learn and get up to speed. So I would love, you know, if we'd be able to look into that possibility.
Yeah. Direction from the board, I will definitely do that. Yep.
Great. That was my questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Trustee Ona.
Okay, I want to know how often or what days of the week do teachers give the packets for the students, the work packets, so they can work at home? Because it is like at school when we're teaching, we still give them some work to practice what they have been learning. And I think that should be part every day, regardless of if they have internet or not. So like at our school, we give them every Friday. We put them outside the classroom and the parents come and pick them up, then bring back the work, because if we just give them packets and we're not checking the work and, you know, grading it or checking it, then nothing is done because the students don't feel like they have to turn it in. So I would like to make sure that we give the packets to the students and they bring it back, make it a routine, check it and keep track of it, because that's a very good way to know if they are learning online what they are being taught. And another thing is, what's the total of students enrollment right now?
1,733, is that correct, Cindy?
Yes, correct. Well, actually, we added 5 today, so.
You added 538?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so.
I think Trustee Gona had a question before that about handing out packets and
Yeah, how are we handing them out? Is somebody taking them home? Like to my special ed kids, I take them home because I have to explain the parents how to do it. Otherwise, you know, they just come and they don't do it. But regular students might be able to do it. So that's my question.
Yes, so each site does have a packet distribution schedule. And so that was part of also an agreement that we would also provide hard copies of material that students would be working on as well.
Yeah, that'll be really good, especially for those who right now cannot connect. But again, are we checking that work and giving feedback to the students?
Right, so there's a lot of work that our staff is focusing on, and now that the Smart Start has ended and we've officially started the long, regular instructional day, it has, it's very taxing, and we're also learning about what is actually happening on the other side of the screen for our students. And there are some behaviors that we're learning how to navigate through as home life is home life, and teachers don't have much control about what is taking place on that side of the screen. So they're learning how to manage that, as well as trying to keep students engaged, as well as taking and recording the formative assessments as they are teaching, because we have to collect information about what students are learning. That information is going to help us identify students who are going to need more support for eventually when we are going to be able to hopefully focus on bringing some cohort students onto campus. And we need to be able to identify which of those students are at risk, whether or not they're students with unique needs, or English language learners, or homeless and foster youth, or those students who have not responded successfully through this distance learning process. And that's why the MTSS process is going to be critical. And right now we're focusing primarily on the attendance. And then once we get our formative assessments complete, which is going to take some time, but we are shooting for the beginning of October to get the reading assessments done, in the beginning of the year assessments done, so that we know where our students are and we can start building upon where we need to get our students. So we are measuring and assessing where our students are based on what we teach them, and hoping they're learning what we're teaching them, and then also through formal assessments.
So do you mean that the staff, teachers have not been checking the students' work packets? Is that the answer? Because I was asking
No,
if—
that's not the answer.
No, I was asking if the students are taking work packets, are they bringing them back and teachers are, checking it and sending it back to students, giving feedback?
So remember, the first 2 weeks was Smart Start, where we were connecting, socializing, building classroom culture, making sure the kids know how to log in, making sure families were successful doing that. That was part of our MOU with the Teacher Association as well. And now we are doing the formal instruction, where there's blocked off synchronous learning times along with asynchronous learning times, where we have asked our teacher teams to ensure that they are using Padlet and other ways to measure students' response to what teachers are learning. And then Letta, if you can speak a little bit about the packets that will go home, because we already sent some materials home, but now learning packets are going to go home as well. So we've had about 8 days of school where it's primarily been, and you saw our data, who is connected and who is not, and that's 82%. So we still have to do our due diligence to reach out to families.
Yeah, it's a lot. Wow.
A lot of did
So our sites are setting up a bi-weekly student materials pickup schedule. So students will have the opportunity to pick up new materials every 2 weeks. And if there's a need to turn work back into teachers, that would be a great time to do that. And for some of the work in the core content areas, the students actually don't need packets because they're receiving materials at the beginning of the year that they can use to do work in different content areas. So for example, with our K-5 math adoption investigations, students receive a new consumable workbook at the beginning of each year. So students have received those, and then they can be completing the work asynchronously at a time that works for them, for whatever lessons are assigned by their teacher. And then obviously in a workbook, that's also not on a screen or on the computer. So you really want the work on screen and the work off screen to go together. So that's one example. Another is receiving a book bag with books at the student's level. They can read and then bring the bag back and exchange their books out for new books, and also make sure that the level of the books they have is appropriate, given our assessment information as they grow throughout the year. So those are a few examples.
So how do you know if they're doing the consumables?
Right.
That would be the opportunity to turn the work back into the teacher. And like you're pointing out, that might be necessary for students who are having connectivity issues. But for students who are able to connect through the learning management systems like Seesaw and Google Classroom, students can submit work through the computer, but they can also take photos of work that they complete that's pencil paper and submit it to the teacher that way. So it gives us many different options. And we're also obligated by the state of California to provide daily live instruction with a certificated staff member and peers. So we understand that some families might have trouble with connectivity, but we don't want to stop there and say, okay, some set of students are having trouble connecting, so we're going to provide paper pencil alternatives, because that's not a replacement for instruction. So in this very different and like kind of strange COVID environment where school is virtual, getting students online is really imperative, and it's also an equity issue because we know that surrounding districts have families that are much more likely to have internet connectivity and devices and not even give it a second thought. That's just assumed that it's part of how their household functions. Therefore, their students have no problem accessing virtual school. And that might not be the case for our students, but that's why we've been working so hard on the connectivity piece, because the options for learning and the opportunity for learning really grow exponentially when you can connect regularly.
I think also the hubs that we're trying to have on campus is also going to help support, which is why I was happy to see that in the presentation. Just I think some students just need additional support. You know, they don't have parents at home or parents with maybe the ability or the know-how, and having a place where they can go and get reliable internet and have an adult there support them is going to be really critical to closing that gap, as you're talking about, Laura. So I think that answers your question, Trustee Gona.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm really looking forward for the hubs. We really need them for those students who need the support. Thank you.
Thank you.
So through the chair, I just have a quick question. During the Smart Start period, and you had parents come and kids come to the campus, were the teachers there or just the support staff on campus?
It did vary depending on if teachers felt comfortable being on campus or not, and likewise with families. Some families didn't feel comfortable coming on campus. Classified staff did help significantly to distribute materials, and also be mindful that it wasn't just the admin assistants. We also had transportation help, student services in the schools contact families as well. So it's been across the board effort.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if there are no more questions from the board or comments, I don't know if there's any.
We have a speaker, I believe.
Speakers. Okay.
Solomon,
One has a hand up.
We have one hand raised.
You should be able to speak now. Jenny?
Hi, this is Jenny Bloom. I just want to say, as a parent, I think one of the questions you guys were asking or have been talking about for the last few minutes about curriculum and packets, you know, as a parent in the district, my daughter definitely has been taking pictures of the stuff that she's completed. She does have packets that she's doing with her teacher and in independent learning time. The teachers were on campus and we were able to meet our teacher. I know our teacher has also stepped in a lot to help parents that have had digital issues with the computer. So I just also want to just say, from a parent perspective, the teachers and the schools have been doing a really great job to making sure that they're open to help parents through any of these issues that they're having. And they have been very responsive. And that's just been my experience.
Thank you.
Thank you for your and sharing that perspective. It's always important to have a parent perspective in these conversations. All right, is there any other speaker, Solomon, or was that it?
That's the only one that's raised their hand, so I believe that's it.
Okay, awesome. Let's move on then. Thank you again, staff, for putting that together and giving us that update. We will move to the business departments for our hub update, actually, speaking of which. Or no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We have the public hearing for the learning continuity and attendance plan first.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so I can share the slides with you this evening. And this is Lara Berenin, Director of Curriculum and Instruction. I'm going to go to the beginning of the presentation. Okay. Okay, so we are holding our public hearing this evening for the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. I'm going to go through the major components of the plan, and then we will open it up for public comment. So to start off, what is the Learning Continuity Plan? This plan is intended...
Excuse me, I'm sorry. If this is a public hearing, don't we have to open the public hearing first?
Oh, I'm sorry.
She's giving the presentation. We haven't reached the public hearing yet. The public hearing is when we'll allow and ask people to speak if they have any comments on the presentation and what's being shared with us, Trustee Wilson.
Thank you for clarifying. We really wanted to share about the plan prior to opening for public comment, because the intention is that the public comment is an opportunity for stakeholder engagement and input into the plan prior to approval later this month. So I'll be giving an overview of the plan, like I mentioned, and this plan is essentially replacing our typical LCAP, or Local Control and Accountability Plan, that we would have had in place for the 2021 school year were it not for the COVID emergency starting this past spring. The Learning Continuity Plan memorializes all of the components of the planning process that you've been hearing about since the spring, related to all the facets of the operation of our district and education of our students that has had to change due to COVID and distance learning. The components of the plan are listed here, and I'll go through each of them. As I mentioned, this is an overview of the plan in its totality. There's two attachments to this item in the board agenda this evening. One is the plan template from the state of California that we'll submit after it's been approved. And the second is our local district recovery plan, which gives much more detail on each of the items there, and is also a further fleshed out document that we've built on from the one that we shared in July when we shared about our planning for a potential hybrid instructional model for the 2021 school year, and the beginnings of the plans for distance learning, which is the way that we ended up starting this year. So we know that there has been a tremendous impact of COVID-19 in our community since March. And in response to the situation, in preparation for the 2021 school year, we formed the Reopening Task Force in May. The task force met through the summer along with a variety of subcommittees that you've heard about, focusing on three priorities: health and safety, student learning and development, and a community focus, a focus on community and stakeholder engagement. The Reopening Task Force has now shifted in name to the School Improvement Working Group. As you know, school has opened, not with students on campus as we thought might be possible earlier in the summer, but the year has started nonetheless. And we really wanted to capture that ongoing and sort of cyclical feedback loop that we'll be engaged in throughout the year, with both this task force shifted to working group, and then also with all of our stakeholders throughout the year. And then we also know that the context around COVID can shift and change throughout the year, whether we like it or not. And we really need to be flexible and adapt to the given situation. So that's what the working group will continue to meet around as we go throughout the year. An abundance of stakeholder engagement is a stringent requirement as part of this plan. And you've heard here in our board updates over time the many different ways we've engaged our stakeholders. So that includes starting with distance learning surveys conducted this spring of students, staff, and parents, regular DAC-DLAC meetings, the task force and subcommittees that I mentioned, collaborating with the bargaining units, and then today holding our public hearing on the learning continuity and attendance plan. And then moving forward, also, we have a community input form that is available on our website where stakeholders can either give suggestions or ask questions. And then we will be posting our responses to those also on the website. And then we'll have further plan discussion and then board approval at our regularly scheduled meeting on September 24th and submit it to the county and the state by the deadline of September 30th. And then finally, our plan describes ongoing engagement. So like I just mentioned, we want to have an ongoing feedback loop where we are collecting data on how distance learning is going for students, family, and staff, and then using that to inform our ongoing plans. You can really see the impact of stakeholder engagement in our recovery plan document, which, as I mentioned, is the longer document that fleshes out all the different sections. And there will be some detail listed in our LCP around how the stakeholders have influenced what you see in the plan. So you'll hear that as I move through the sections. The next major section in the plan is around the continuity of learning. So to start off, the state is asking, how are we planning to offer in-person learning to the greatest extent possible? And as we know, the circumstances around COVID, even down to the color rating of our county in the most recent iteration of the governor's evaluation of county status around the spread of COVID in the community, is such that we're not able to have the hybrid plan implemented that we developed at the beginning of the summer. But when we did that plan, as we shared with you in July, we developed with stakeholder input a plan where we would be able to have about half of the students on campus at a time in an A-B model, a slightly different schedule for TK5 and 6-8, really taking into account an abundance of protocols for staff and student safety, a plan for accounting for wellness and social emotional learning of students as they go through these different potentially traumatic experiences. And then also planning for ongoing academic assessment. So where we are in our assessment plan will differ depending when we're able to bring students onto campus for hybrid learning, but we will continue with our assessment plan regardless of whether we are distance or hybrid. Each part of the plan needs to list the actions and associated cost, somewhat like we would in our normal LCAP, but slightly less detail, slightly more summarized. So a few of the costs associated with in-person instructional offerings are listed here. And one of them that President Pulido mentioned that we'll touch on more this evening is the formation of learning hubs or safe workspaces for students to attend virtual school and submit homework to facilitate student learning and competency. We're also looking at bringing in additional resources, both in counseling and psychological resources, and then tutoring and intervention, so academic resources to support students. And then there's also a significant investment in personal protective equipment or PPE, which is needed anytime we have staff and then later on students meeting in person. A very big part of the continuity of instruction section is around distance learning. So the notes that you see listed here are just a reminder of the state requirements around either distance learning or hybrid instruction this year. So these are listed under distance learning because that's how we're starting the year. So for example, we know that we're obligated to provide 180 instructional days. We know that there's a minimum minute requirement for instructional time each day, depending on the grade level, and that those minutes can be a combination of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. We've talked through the different requirements listed here, so I'll just give you a moment to remind yourself. As we shared earlier this month, our district distance learning instructional goals that we're focusing on district-wide are to engage students in learning as evidenced by oral and written responses, to use formative assessment to determine what students are learning, to adjust our teaching based on student needs, and to share student progress with parents, and to focus on culturally responsive teaching practices. I'm re-sharing the sample schedules for first grade, and then next I'll share sixth grade again, just as a reminder of the way that we've tried to put together all of the different requirements and components of distance learning into a week view for a student. So as I shared before, you can see here both synchronous and asynchronous instruction, which includes whole group and small group, instruction across all core content areas, and including specials and PE, and then also time for building class community, like through a morning meeting or restorative circle first thing in the morning, which is really important for social emotional learning and building relationships between teachers and students, and also students and students. And then this again is the example from sixth grade, so also showing how all of those different pieces and requirements of our educational program and distance learning fit together from a middle school perspective. So using a blocked master schedule where students have their periods more or less every other day or twice a week, Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Friday, and then with other classes on Mondays such as elective or PE, more asynchronous learning, and also small group instruction. Access to devices and connectivity is critical to make distance learning work for our students. And so again, there's further detail listed in the plan itself. But as a reminder, we have distributed iPads for TK through second grade students to use at home, Chromebooks for third through eighth grade students, and I believe a total of 775 hotspots distributed combined with last year and this year. And then as Solomon described, more on their way to meet our students' needs. And then ongoing help desk support is really important as well. So families can actually reach out via phone or online form to indicate that they have questions or need one-on-one support, and then staff can follow up. Another section related to distance learning is pupil participation and progress. So this speaks to the state requirement that you saw a few slides ago, looking both at attendance and engagement, and then also assessment. So as I described in our distance learning update, we have a system for tracking synchronous and asynchronous instruction. And then as Gina described, through our multi-tiered systems of support, our teachers will have the opportunity to regularly review that attendance data and then also academic data together in grade level collaboration and also with the support of an instructional coach or an administrator, and track student progress and participation over time. We also have in our plan listed our assessment plan. And there's a few different components for our assessment plan. So one is state assessments. The first state assessment we are tackling this year in our virtual environment is the LPAC, to measure the English language proficiency of students who have not taken the LPAC before. So the initial LPAC at the beginning of the year is meant to help us determine, is this student classified as an English learner, or can they be reclassified fluent English proficient? So that will be our first foray into state assessments in a virtual setting. As I'm sure you remember, those assessments were waived last spring. So that's a big shift for this year. We've also been informed by CDE to expect to administer all of the summative assessments this spring, regardless of virtual setting or not. So those include our summative LPAC, for which the window opens in February, and that applies to all of our English learners. And then the CASP assessment in English Language Arts and Math for third through eighth grade. The California alternate assessment for students whose IEP deems that necessary, and the CAST, the California Science Test for grades 5 and 8. So more details to come on how that will work in a virtual setting if necessary. We also have quite a few local benchmark assessments in our plan. So with a special focus is required by the state on English language arts, math, and English language development. So we have our benchmark periods in the year. We just call them beginning of year, which is around now, middle of year, which is around January, and end of year, which is around May, June. And we use our local benchmark assessments to track student progress over time and then also year to year. So one example that was referenced is the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment to measure reading levels for the elementary grades. And another example is the measure of academic progress for reading and for math for 6-8. So we know that it's required by the state and immensely important to collect this assessment data on our students. And we have not administered them virtually before. So we know there will be a learning curve, and our instructional leaders, the C&I team, administrators, and coaches are definitely working hard to figure out how to best support teachers and provide examples and training for how they can be administered virtually. And then finally, we also referenced ongoing formative assessment as part of MTSS. And ongoing formative assessment really helps us collaborate in grade level meetings and ask ourselves, how can we align our instruction so we have an equitably high level of expectations and quality of instruction across classrooms, and to be able to answer the questions, what do we want our students to learn in really any given lesson, and how will we know if they learned it? And ongoing formative assessment can be as simple as an exit ticket. So a single math problem that a teacher is asking students to complete at the end of a lesson, collecting that back, and then sorting it to see which students are getting it and which students are not quite there yet. And then deciding, okay, how will I respond in my instruction for the students who are not there yet? And so again, this is a new layer that we're adding on this year for distance learning, but really critical for understanding where our students are. Another component for distance learning is professional development. So the different topics that I've been raising that are new are definitely part of PD, and the PD time that we have to address those is listed here. And then a few of the topics that we know will provide an arc across our whole year are around anti-racism and culturally responsive teaching practices, how to really deliver engaging online instruction and have many points of opportunity for students to participate and give input, to talk in small groups or partners, to share info back to the teacher. We have our year-long balanced literacy initiative in TK through 5th grade. And then we also have instructional leadership development, primarily with new leaders focused on alignment, equity, and high quality instruction. Let's see, so Tony Stone will talk about how staff roles and responsibilities have shifted due to COVID.
Thank you, Laura. So as you know, we have asked a lot of our classified staff, and all of them have been responsible at their school sites for helping to prepare student materials for distribution. So that includes supporting with technology distribution, sending out those book bags we talked about earlier, and those workbooks that students are using. We also have a number of staff who will be connecting with students through their teachers' Zooms, and those include our small group instructors and our paraeducators, as well as instructional aid. We're relying on our bus drivers and van drivers to do wellness checks when they do material technology and meal delivery to families. And then some of the COVID specific duties, all of our administrators are now responsible for contact tracing and notifying individuals if there are confirmed COVID-19 cases. And when students return to campus, we'll have a number of classifications to support students with mask wearing, washing hands, making sure they're getting their temperatures and symptoms checked before entering campus in the mornings. And for staff, our administrative secretaries and administrative assistants have taken on that role, doing those wellness checks for staff in the mornings.
Another important component of our distance learning plan is support for pupils with unique needs. So we really need to think about our English learners and how we're providing integrated and designated English language development instruction. I already talked about the LPAC assessment. And then we also have in our plan an additional resource, which is the Lexia Blended Learning Program for asynchronous work in language and literacy development. For foster and homeless youth, we have ongoing monitoring of students and communication with families. And then we also have resources to be made available if needed, and also home visits conducted when needed. For students with special needs, they have continued services provided virtually per their IEP, online curriculum resources available, for example, the Sunday system that's being used for students who might have dyslexia and need that type of reading intervention. Sunday has a whole host of online resources that we're excited to use. And then also continued assessment as needed to determine students' levels to make sure that the services being provided are matching student needs. So a few of the actions and associated costs related to distance learning are listed here. Some of these are definitely around technology. Others are related to take-home materials that we've mentioned. Definitely additional professional development for teachers in support of the distance learning program. Instructional improvements at the middle school level that we can actually see the impact of already, such as class size reduction, extended day, small group instructors, instructional coaches, and intervention teachers. And then also enrichment funding for art, music, and other subjects. The next section of the plan is around pupil learning loss. So we know that there's the potential for students to have essentially like lost ground on their learning compared to where they would be if we had not had student dismissal due to COVID, or if we were in person right now and we're not in distance learning, or it's also called unfinished learning. And so the very first step, as we've been saying, in order to know where students are and what their needs are, is to assess them and to find out, you know, where are they and how do we address their needs and how do their current learning levels compare to where we would want them to be at the beginning of this school year. So a few of our strategies in TK through 5th grade include regular differentiated instruction by the classroom teacher. Another component is literacy intervention from our reading specialists. And another is tutoring through partners such as Reading Partners and All Students Matter. And then in 6-8, again, we have differentiated instruction. We have mentoring, tutoring, small group instructors, and also intervention classes for English language arts and for math for students who need that extra period of small group instruction. And then we also need to determine the effectiveness of our pupil learning loss strategies. So we haven't started that yet because we're really at the very beginning of this plan, but we will be measuring student growth throughout the year, and we'll be looking at the different interventions or supports that students are receiving to determine if they're effective. And that process is really held inside of MTSS. So all of the structures that Gina presented on related to the classroom level, the grade level, the site leadership level, the district level, those really all fit together to help us monitor how all the strategies we're using are working. A few of the actions and associated costs to support pupil learning loss are listed here. So additional tutoring and other programming to provide instruction to students, digital assessments, math intervention software, and our literacy initiative investment. So literacy coaching and intervention support. The next section is on mental health and social emotional well-being. So Cindy Chin will say a few notes about this one.
We recognize how difficult this time is for everyone, from students to staff to families. And so we want to make sure that we're building the relationships which was part of the reason why we started off the school year with the Smart Start. Classrooms also do community meetings at the elementary level. And we want to make sure that, we're really, as it says, intentional with building those relationships with our families. And we recognize that our staff and our families may need some additional supports. And so that's why we'll offer workshops with our different mental health partners like the Children's Health Council, CASI, and the Child Mind Institute, who are all groups who are able to provide some type of counseling for our students. In addition to those previously mentioned groups, one of the MOUs tonight was with Star Vista to confirm our partnership to have mental health providers from Star Vista. And so each site has a number of counselors for any services that they might need, and those referrals can come from parents or staff.
Thank you. The next section of the plan asks us to describe pupil and family engagement and outreach. So family engagement is really important to us, and we've touched on it throughout this period of student dismissal to talk about how we're engaging families, how teachers are connecting with parents, how many parents we're seeing actually attend our virtual DAC/DLAC meetings. So it's been really exciting to see all the ways that we're able to stay in touch with parents, even in a virtual setting. And also just to make sure to keep family engagement in the forefront, because with students learning from home, families are really now more than ever those co-teachers of their students. So we have the expectation of regular communication to families. And one way we've seen teachers and principals really execute on this is through Parent Square. So it's been a great tool for staff to send information, reminders, links to parents in a very easy and targeted way. And then we've even seen some teachers use the scheduling feature where they can provide time slots that parents can connect with them, and parents can sign up right through the app. So that's been exciting to see, and some good initial parent feedback as well. We are also obligated to report on student progress to families. So that's more specific because it's around sharing the academic progress of that parent's child, right? So not just the information of when class is happening, but also how the students are doing. So we'll be giving out report cards and having conferences at the end of each trimester. But that's quite a ways from now. So we'll also do progress reports and have ongoing communication regarding attendance, work submission, and formative assessment feedback to students. We often hear from parents that they'd like to know sooner rather than later if there's a challenge or something that they can help their students with, or if they're not attending. So we definitely strive to do that. We're continuing to have school-based events, even in a virtual environment. And so, for example, back to school nights are occurring where families can log on and meet their child's teacher and learn more about how school will work for that classroom this year. And then we also have our monthly DAC/DLAC meetings. And then in addition to that, actually, Superintendent Sudaria has added a monthly sort of more casual check-in meeting where families are able to join and share how things are going. So a listening session. For school nutrition, we've been sharing updates throughout the last several months about meal distribution, and our essential goal with meal distribution is to provide the highest quality meal in the safest environment possible to as many students as possible. So currently meal distribution is occurring twice per week with a continuation of the Seamless Summer program in place, meaning that we're able to provide meals for any children in the community, regardless of whether or not they attend Ravenswood schools. We still have meal delivery available for those who are not able to pick it up. And we partner with Second Harvest for additional meal distribution that's also accessible to adults. Towards the end of the plan, there's an opportunity to list any additional actions and associated costs. And so this is just sort of like a catch-all category to describe anything else that we're doing or expending that's related to our COVID response. And then finally, the last section of the plan is around increased or improved services. So increased or improved services is asking us to say that the needs of unduplicated pupils are considered first. So those are our low income students, English learners, or foster youth. And the percentage of unduplicated pupils in any given district can vary widely. So for us, last year, that was 92% of our students. So it's very clear to say that those groups of students are absolutely first and foremost in our planning, certainly in general for any school year and definitely in distance learning. And then we are also obligated to demonstrate how we're increasing funding compared to the previous year based on our LCFF calculator, specific to the needs of unduplicated pupils. So increasing the funding or possibly, increasing the service or improving on a service that was provided in a previous year. And so based on the LCFF calculator, there's a percentage listed there that we need to focus on, and that would translate to about $5.5 million of increased or improved services. And our actual total, summing all of the categories I've shared so far, is over 8 million. So we're definitely meeting that threshold. So that concludes the summary of the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. And I'm happy now to take any questions from the board and then also to open the public hearing for any public comments or questions.
All right, thank you for that presentation. Are there any comments or questions from the board before we move to the public hearing?
I just want to say that, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say that thank you for that long and very detailed presentation. I really like it and I don't have any questions.
Thank you. All right, so if no other board members have any questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
Through the chair,
Yes.
then I'd like to make the motion that we open the public hearing.
Second.
All right, it's been motion second. Roll call, please. Superintendent Sidoria.
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
Aye.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyana,
Aye.
Trustee Chabot-Maheen.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 5-0. So we have officially opened the public hearing. This is an opportunity for the public to also make comments or ask questions of what was just presented. So if you would like to participate, please raise your hand and our Director of IT will identify you and bring you in.
No hands so far.
All right, well, that means your presentation was very thorough. Excellent. And usually at least one of us have a question. So there you go. Great job. All right, I will then entertain a motion. No, I think we can just adjourn. I don't think we have to entertain a motion to adjourn. All right, so we will adjourn now the public hearing since there are no speakers. Thank you very much. That will take us to item 10A, which is the Learning Hub updates, which I'm excited about.
Go for it, Will.
Thanks, everyone. I'm also just going to quickly pull up our slides here. Can you see the Community Learning Hub update slides?
Yeah.
Fantastic. My name is Will Eager. I'm the Chief Business Officer. I'm looking forward to walking through 3 very exciting items tonight. So let's dive right in. As I mentioned last week, and as Cindy mentioned earlier in the evening, Our survey data suggests that about 25% of our families are going to need childcare. That would work out to be about 580 children. Cindy presented some slightly more updated data tonight, so this is reflecting data from last week, but same information that you guys have seen. We're excited to announce, and I believe some of you saw this earlier in the week, and hopefully, and I know many of our families have seen this as well, but we've identified 3 partners who will offer a small group learning experience on our campus. The 3 partners are the Boys and Girls Club, which is going to be operating at Los Robles Ronald McNair, Bellhaven Elementary, and the Casania School for the Arts. Additionally, we're going to have the San Francisco 49ers Academy and the East Palo Alto Tennis and Tutoring Program, both of which will be operating at sort of opposite ends of Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School. These programs, we're still working on developing enrollment, and we encourage families, if any are watching or listening, to reserve their spot online as soon as possible. If you visit our website or have seen your emails or texts or Facebook come out, we're trying to get sort of as many families interested as possible. At our latest count, we've heard from about 250 families who've expressed interest in reserving a spot at one of these programs so far. Based on our survey data, that's actually a fairly high percentage of the total families who we estimate may need a spot. It is certainly not all of our families. And I just want to be clear that, right at the onset, we will not be able to offer a spot to all of those families immediately. So we're going to do our best to meet the needs of our families while also ensuring that our schools remain safe for students, staff, and other sort of workers in the district. Now, enrollment's open to any family, as long as they're a Ravenswood City School District family, of course. And we're letting our partners manage the enrollment process. So students would enter into an agreement with our partners to reserve a spot at one of these sites. We're not sort of the central management for all of our students. We're sort of helping facilitate matching here. Programming is going to be sort of largely determined by the specific programs, by sort of partners. We're going to sort of provide, I think, hopefully helpful guidance, but guidance from a distance. The partners are legally responsible to operate the program. They have control over what the program might look like, the day length of the program, and other sort of key factors. And students and families, I think, are hopefully aware of this at this point, but should be aware. If they're not, they're entering into an agreement with the program, not necessarily one with us. Of course, we're expecting that the partners will create a safe learning environment to support students in engaging with distance learning. Some partners we know are going to be offering after-school programming as well that they'll be doing on their own. And the specific hours, as I mentioned, will vary a little bit by site. We're pleased to share with you 3 MOAs with the partners. We've been working very quickly on working with County Council to create an agreement that allows these programs to operate on our site. As you can imagine, given some of the sort of newness of the pandemic, it's a traditional facilities use agreement, but there are, of course, some sort of pandemic unique attributes or aspects to it. So accordingly, we heard back from County Council on Friday, and we were able to get, I think, most of the agreements sort of officially signed late last evening. And we're able, I think, to share with you all the agreement in principle that we reached with our partners on Friday, although we're sort of working back and forth on some of the legalese until today. I want to mention specifically, I think I need to at this point, the agreement specifically with the 49ers Academy had a small typo. So in the version that you have in Appendix 1, we are missing the words December 30th. We have added that back in for the version that you will see tomorrow. Beyond that specific typo, the structure of all of these agreements is exactly the same. There is some very, very minor wording differences based on the preferences of the partners. But the MOAs all more or less say that we're going to work together to identify safe spaces on campus, that the partners are responsible and will follow all relevant state and federal guidelines around student safety. Very helpfully, late last week, the state released some guidelines for running these types of programs on our campus. And we're very grateful for that. And we made sure that our agreements here make it clear that our partners are going to be following those, as well as working with our partners just to make sure that we understand what their plans are and that they understand what their plans are. As I mentioned before, the partner will oversee the specific pieces of the program. Of course, we're going to provide some support since they are at our site. So, basic maintenance, things like that, we will be providing. And we'll also be providing custodial support, meals for students and families who are already able to pick up meals at multiple points during the week. And where possible, if we have instructional materials, these are our students, we want to make sure that they have supplies where possible. So we are looking to do that if we can. The partners, of course, are getting some funding, which I'm happy to answer any questions about. But as part of that funding, we are expecting them to purchase supplies for sort of day-to-day operations of the program. And lastly, we're in just very unusual circumstances here. And so one of the things that we made clear with our partners is, we really want to just be flexible. We want to be adaptive. We want to make sure that we're doing right for our students and families and staff who are on site. And we don't know 100% exactly what that looks like at each of our sites just yet. And so we want to be very thoughtful about, making sure we're starting safe, starting small, and starting responsibly. And then quickly, once we demonstrate procedures and practices that work, quickly scaling up to serve as many of our students as we can. It's very clear this is a need in our community, but it's also just completely paramount that we serve our students in a way that ensures safety, right? And so some of you may feel we're starting too slow, and some of you may feel we're starting too fast. And I think, we're trying to find that right sweet spot of starting slow and growing as quickly and safely as possible. I'll stop now. I know it's been a little bit of a long night, so I went a little bit quickly here. Are there any questions that I can answer at this point?
Are you? Yeah. Just give me one second. Are you done with the full presentation, or?
I have an appendix slide to talk about some of the finances if it comes up. It's a little bit detailed, but it's up to you. I am sort of done with the presentation, body of the presentation at this point.
Thank you for the presentation. I think that was Trustee Shabon. Okay, yes.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Will, for this presentation. I have a couple of questions, and I think the first is, I think we alluded to it earlier and in the last meeting, but is all of the out-of-pocket costs for the district, is it all covered by this extra federal funding?
Yes, it's covered by the federal learning loss mitigation funding. We received approximately $3 million. I think the specific number is like 2.99 million. Of that, when we met as a team, we allocated 750,000 to support learning hubs. Over the last couple of weeks, I've worked to develop sort of a funding formula that makes sense for our partners, while also remaining within that 750,000 allocation. And of course, is equitable across partners. We wouldn't want one partner to be getting more money than any other partner. And so our funding formula very specifically incentivizes partners for serving the right number of students. They get paid per student and they get paid per hour. So we're incentivizing our partners to offer longer days for more students. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's it. Gotcha. Sorry. I thought you were done.
More or less.
Okay. And so then that we've got the initial cost per the MOU, you've got the initial costs, and then you've got this $575 per hour per student. I'm assuming everything we're covering is, or I'm not assuming, I'm asking, with the initial and the $575 per hour per student, does that cover everything, including everything you mentioned before? We're covering meals, facilities, cleaning, even in the MOU, I saw curricular supplies, which you also mentioned, and even that also could include technology, or these on top of the initial 800 something per student plus 575 per hour per student. And even if it is, nothing's gonna go over 750,000.
Yeah, and let me sort of tease out a little bit, because there were a couple different sort of parts to that. So for example, with meals, we're paying for our meals through the same federal reimbursement program that all of our school lunch goes through. We're not charging our partners to provide those meals, right? Yeah. Similarly, with custodial costs, we're not charging our partners. We're using that out of our existing, general fund budget, but we were planning on paying custodians to be at these sites already. and we're not anticipating at this time any additional custodial costs to support these programs. You know, supplies, I think the partners, there's an expectation that supplies will be purchased, you know, primarily by the partners. Of course, we're not asking partners to buy laptops or iPads for all of our students. We've already provided that through additional or other general WIP funds. So, you know, I think the question you're sort of teasing at is, do we anticipate any additional costs through the general fund as part of running this program? And the answer to that is no. But there are aspects of this program of services we're providing to students that are not necessarily covered explicitly by the $750,000 from the federal government. Does that make sense? Sorry.
That does make sense.
Okay.
That does make sense. And I don't want to hog the floor, so let me just give you two more, and then I'll step back and maybe come back in afterwards. The third is there a way to see the total cost? And just so you know, my bottom line, I keep thinking, and I think I brought this up last time too, just thinking about like, are there additional ways that we could use the money to cover and support community, right? Our students, families, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know the total cost of funding this program? So I know how much we are paying as a district, right? You've given us that number, $7,000. Is there a way to know the total cost, to know how much our partners are coming in? Like, what are they putting on the table as well? Or are we covering 100% of the cost of the program?
It's a really, really good question, and a difficult one to answer, in part because no one's ever run this program before. And I think, you know, it very much depends a little bit on the length of the program and the length of the pandemic. So we've committed to funding this program at what I view as hopefully most of the variable costs. So the costs specifically incurred for these programs to serve these students. I'm hoping to cover that using federal funding to the end of December 30th, at the end of the calendar year. After that point, we no longer have federal funds available to cover this. And I'm asking the partners to cover any costs beyond that.
Got it.
So if the pandemic goes for the next 9 months, you know, the partners will end up incurring a fairly sizable portion of the total cost here. If the pandemic goes for 1 month, you know, they're actually potentially better off, right?
Okay. And then I do see though that it does say in December, we might add an extra $100,000 to the amount.
Yeah, and it's a little bit at sort of our discretion here. You know, the thought in that particular case, we have total discretion over those funds. The thought in that case is, you know, if the federal funds are going to run out and we have remaining federal funds and we can identify other uses to do that, and we expect the program to continue running past December 30th and we're not necessarily able to continue to support them, this gives us a little bit of flexibility here to support the programs in sort of either closeout costs or continuing costs.
Makes sense. And I love that we're doing this. I love that we're in partnership with other organizations. I just want to make sure, or just see what other people who I know are getting big donations, right, to serve the community, to see how much they're participating in this, you know, monetarily. And my last question before I pause is around liability. Liability of, let's say, if something happens, particularly around if someone contracts COVID-19 or something while working in our facilities and things like that, to what extent are we responsible for covering any kinds of, you know, stay at home, medical expenses, whatever?
Sure. Well, to answer your first question, which I guess was more of a statement, just to respond to it, I'm very excited to talk about this. We've worked really closely with our partners over the last couple of weeks to develop a funding formula that we think is fair to both the district and uses our funds responsibly and equitably, similar to what we talked about as sort of our priorities. And I'm very happy to talk about the funding methodology here, because one of our other big goals is transparency, right? So I want to be as transparent as possible, and we came up with a elaborate funding formula to get there. The second piece around liability, you know, one of the things in conversations with county council is, because we are in an unprecedented situation, there is no contract that we can design that gives us no risk or no exposure. So by entering into any agreement where students or staff come to our campuses, there is the at least theoretical possibility that somebody could accuse the district, rightfully or wrongly, of in some way contributing to them contracting COVID. That's the bad news. You know, the good news is we're asking the programs, excuse me, our partners are asking students to sign liability waivers, which sort of to some extent absolves them of a reasonable amount of the risk. And we're working with county council to ask students to sign a waiver as well. You know, because we are providing custodial support, you know, a student could say, I contracted this because of some kind of custodial risk. And so we're asking students to sign a waiver as well. You know, again, though, these waivers are not airtight. There's no case law on pandemic contractions. So I do just want to be clear, this is a risk. We've done what we believe is the best job we can to mitigate our liability here. We've seen other places in the state sort of operate these programs, and you know, we've all, I think, read news stories at this point of colleges that have reopened and students have contracted the disease there. So I think there certainly will be cases here, and we don't know how those are going to play out, but we do believe that we are as well protected as we can be at this point. Sorry for too longer answers there.
No, thank you so much, and thank you, fellow trustees.
Well, they were great questions. All right. Any other trustees with questions or comments?
Yes, through the chair.
Yes, Trustee Wilson.
Thank you for the great presentation. And I want to follow up with Tam's question, because I get where you're coming from. There are organizations in the community that are receiving funding for providing services during this time. And we want to make sure that they are investing those dollars and that we're not bearing the full cost. Is that the direction?
Absolutely. That's 100%.
Right. That's what I thought. And you're right on, spot on about that. Okay, so I have a question about funding also. We don't, I shouldn't ask it that way, sorry. How does the state reimburse us for ADA?
Do you mean during this time or
yeah,
in general?
During this time.
I think that's a good question. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for you at this point. Currently, for this current ongoing fiscal year, we're using last year's ADA, which I think was sort of a snapshot that closed before the pandemic. For next year, my understanding, and again, I think this is all sort of subject to change, is that we'll be using a sort of current year enrollment projection. Superintendent, I don't know if you have something to weigh in there. You may know more information about this than I do. I know it's changing somewhat here.
Yeah, we're required to actually take attendance. And so we will be able to provide that data. Cindy, are you able to confirm that?
In terms of the ADA, they'll take the 3-year average, right, in terms of our enrollment numbers. And so while we are held at the approximately 93% of our attendance that froze at the end of February, you know, we could potentially take a little bit of a hit just because we froze at that 93% as opposed to what our actual percentage would have been. And then also it kind of froze at that enrollment number. So even though we were enrolling some kids who moved into the area during the pandemic, but in terms of this school year, as Will said, we are using the 93%. The AD, in terms of attendance and what we need to submit, we need to submit our enrollment numbers, and then we need to let the state know how our chronic absentee numbers are.
Okay, so we don't actually have to give them a breakdown of each day that the student is there. And the question I'm having is that these partners are providing services from 9 to 3, right? Is that correct?
Some of the times vary, but yes.
Yes, I mean, basically. So can we count those kids as being in our school if they're over in the Boys and Girls Club program?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And they'll still be participating in our distance learning programming. They will not be running, BGCP will not be running its own curriculum or mini school. They're going to be using our materials.
Right, which was my other question, is that what is the collaboration between the classroom teachers and these partners? Because we don't want them, I mean, we want them to support the students' learning. So there has to be that collaboration. So is that in place?
Yes, so we're going to ask for who the staffers are so that they actually can be able to log into the Google Classroom and CSTOC platforms.
Great. Okay. And then just a couple of more. Future costs. Oh, families. So when you say we're open to 250 families, that's not necessarily 250 kids. That's 250 families.
I said, sorry, and I meant to say 250 students, not 250 families.
That's what I was trying to get, because I'm like, wait a minute.
Sorry about that.
So my other question is a logistics one. So let's say we have a family, right? And the family has 3 kids and they say, oh, we want to participate. Does that family participate in just one of those programs? Or does a family have the ability to say, okay, I want you at the Boys and Girls Club and I want you at tutoring and tennis?
You guys are really asking just wonderful questions, and they're really difficult. We struggled with this one a lot. I think the state health guidelines ask us to keep families together,
Right.
and so there's a push for that. Now, on the other hand, I think we can all imagine the difficulty in running a classroom in the middle of a pandemic with new safety routines that includes a kindergartner, a 4th grader, and an 8th grader, all of whom are at different schools, right? And so what we did is we gave the programs a bit of latitude in how they wanted to handle this. I think our thought here is let's learn from the programs and see what's happening, and then make changes where necessary, right? Because I think we struggled with this a good bit. What I know will not happen is we won't have a kindergartner in one family in a different pod next door to their 3rd grade sibling, right? That violates the state health guidelines.
Exactly.
But they might have a kindergartner at BGCP and a 6th grader over at EPAT. But it's a really good question, one that the team wrestled with for a long time.
Yeah, because that's really the issue, is that it like defeats the purpose if you let these kids go to do 2 different things and they're exposed to all these different kids at the same time. It's like, no. So, okay. I think that was it for me. Oh, right. One more, sorry. How are we going to, I think we should, but monitor the ongoing compliance to the standards? I mean, you know what I'm saying? If we're telling them that they have to follow the state guidelines and the state guidelines say, keep the kids 6 feet apart, how do we know they're following that? And will we be monitoring that to make sure? Because really, that's what my concern is. It's like, okay, well, how do we know that they're going to stay true to what the standard is?
It's a great question, Trustee. And I think, it's going to cut both ways, right? I think that they're going to hold our cleaning crews accountable for making sure that we're following the standards. And, we're going to have staff on site at the time. And I think, there'll be folks from my team who are going to go through and make sure that, hey, we're doing a lot of work misting this classroom, making sure it looks good. Are you guys making sure the desks are 6 feet apart, right? Because I think we are certainly, the answer is there will not be zero monitoring over the next few months, right? I think we're going to be monitoring both to make sure they're complying with the rules, but also I think to learn from them, right? I do hope that we're able to go back to hybrid learning. And I think one thing that's exciting and interesting about this is having students on campus allows us to develop routines and learn from the routines on our schools as to how to bring students back safely. Superintendent, is there anything you wanted to add there? I know you. Okay.
No, I'm in full agreement, and it is where both parties are going to have to take on responsibility, and I think we're ready for that. And it is a way for us to assess how best to bring students onto campus.
So I hope that our agreement holds them really liable for not following any kind of regulations, because that is my concern. And then, even though I said that was my last one, now I have another last one. Testing of the staff of our partners. Are they having tests? Are they testing all of their staff people? And can we make that a requirement of the MOU?
It is not currently in the MOU.
Well, you know what? For me, if we don't give these kids, we're passing these kids on to people. And even though we want to do it at an arm's distance in terms of liability, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're not putting our kids into a libelous situation. So we need to figure out how, not figure out, I do think it needs to be part of the agreement that every one of their staff have to be tested and that they take responsibility for making sure that they follow all of the guidelines.
But are you asking for to be tested before the program starts? Because people don't get their results. Like it's like a.
Well, there's a 3-day coming. So I'm going to be on a call tomorrow about COVID testing. The county just announced some new thing that's going to be 3 days. It's a saliva test. So it's not the nose prick thing. So and they're looking for where they can do testing for targeted groups. So. I'm just being real.
Go ahead, Superintendent.
I understand.
We have 1,000 cases in East Palo Alto. We have 1,000 positive cases. We're getting ready to expose these kids to people. We need to make sure that everybody is tested.
Right, and I think families are also aware of the risk. And what we could potentially consider is working with the city to have the testing that they have next door in the district and provide that information to our partners.
Yeah.
Like tomorrow, there's testing and it's a 48-hour turnaround, which will give us enough time to start next week.
Yeah.
But
I think Trustee Wilson, I think you maybe alluded to this, but I think one thing that would be helpful is not just testing once, but testing regularly. And I think one way to help people with that would be to, if we're going to bring more families to our schools, can we get some of those testing centers that you're talking about opening up, either at our schools in our parking lot, right? So it's an easy drop off with students and staff. Or certainly very close to it, as well as obviously, as the superintendent was saying, letting families and staff know about this here. Now, I don't know that we're gonna be able to get it into the MOU and have programs start soon, but I think I can certainly reach out to the partners and maybe we could think about either an amendment or a written commitment of some sort from them to figure out a way to regularly test their staff, not just once at the beginning, but regularly. And also think about ways to make testing opportunities like the one at the district office tomorrow clearly available to our families and staff going forward.
And to make
more aware. I think we've done a decent job of that already. Just wanted
to make them responsible for following the guidelines. I really think that needs to be in the MOU.
Okay. Was that all your questions, Trustee Wilson?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay. Solomon, was there a speaker?
Actually, I have another one too.
It was Mehdi. He might have had something to add around the funding, I thought. But.
On the ADA piece, I think Mehdi's prepared to talk about that in the audit action.
Yes, actually, there was a question about our funding. So basically, this is what I wanted to clarify. In general, there is a clause which is called hold harmless, which means that districts are paid higher of the last year or current year ADA, and the funding is depending on that. With this COVID, when this comes, so they froze our attendance at last year February, and that is what we are still being held at. Although this year we have lower enrollment, so for this year this is the funding level that we will be paid at. When this year ends and the next year comes, at the moment they are hoping that this pandemic will end and we will revert back to the old funding formula. But that is only a hope, and unless we have this pandemic ends, so we will not revert back to that. So at the moment we are being funded last year, February, and we are being held harmless on that. And we are, I think that is quite beneficial to us.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there?
Through the chair, I have another question, unless another trustee wants to go, or there's a question from the.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. One more question about, I think this is specific to our partnership with BGCP. I'm just wondering how this intersects, I don't think at all, but how funding for this program intersects with what they are doing with what we are funding, paying them through our ACES funding, right? Which I don't know all the details of that, but I they're doing check-ins or something during the day with students, which I know we usually pay them for the after school program, right, with our ACES, but now we're paying them, I don't know if it's the same amount of money or less or what, to do some check-ins with students in the day. And I'm just wondering if, I don't really know what's going on. And so it would be good to know, number one, like to see a report of something of like, what is that money? How much money is going to these check-ins, and what is a check-in? Is the same amount of money going to that? And then I think what I'm trying to get to too is like, can any of that funding be used for this? Again, just looking for ways to provide more services, right? And just wondering, where is the money going and how's it being used and who's coming to the table with what?
I'll have Cindy share a little bit about the ACES funding, but we had agreed that the Boys and Girls Club would run our after school programs. But since we don't have after school programs, they're shifting their support so that it's more a virtual social or a wellness check-in. And then also finding out if there's any additional support that they might need around academics. Our after school program is about a 3-hour program, typically after school. So those are the types of services that they're providing during the regular instructional period. What I heard you say, Tam, is that you would like a report potentially at the next board meeting around how BGCP is providing services through ACES funding.
Yes, and I'll leave it to you and Trustee Polito to decide whether it's, a public report or not, or if it's just in a memo or what. But yeah, I think it would just be nice to know how that 3 hours translates really and practically in the day. So again, just thinking about like, if that 3 hours, which I don't know how much time it actually is, if that funding could be used to cover 3 hours of the 9 to 6. Right, that's happening through this program. And then again, you're freeing up some money, right? If there's extra at the end, or if there are other things we could do. So yeah, just throwing out ideas and questions.
Through the chair, that's actually an excellent question, because in a way they could be double dipping. They could have a kid there who's there from 9 to 3 that we're paying with the COVID money. And then they're also saying, oh, that kid I'm checking them in through the ACES money. So they get paid twice for the same kid without not really giving any additional services. Good question.
Well,
I
Cindy,
think Cindy can speak more to the ACES piece. I just want to clarify quickly that the way that our contract is structured for this particular pot of funds, we can make sure that they do not double dip. We can be very explicit about that in sort of how the monthly attendance reports are done. But Cindy, would you mind speaking more to the ACES?
Yeah, so in terms of the ACES money, each school site has allotted about a little over $100,000, with the middle school having, I think, about $121,000 connected to it through ACES. And so, as the superintendent said, the BGCP program switched into what they called crews. And looking at the number of number of students who signed up for these different crews at each school site, they're actually serving more students than they had put down in the MOU at 3 of the sites. So according to attendance, Bellhaven has 142 students. Castaño School of the Arts has 189 students. Los Robles, Ronald McNair is the site that has a slightly lower number of students currently in the crews, and that's 60 students. And then Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School has 179 students. So again, that's a larger number than they had initially had agreed to in the MOU in terms of serving kids. And so through these different crews and connecting, they're able to try and increase that number with not only just the funding that they receive from us, from ACES, but their fundraising as well.
Okay, I still don't know what exactly serving means, but means like practically. But no, thank you for the
Sorry, so
talk about that offline.
Oh no, I can tell you a little bit about what they're doing. So they're helping to connect with some of the communication for our kids who are having difficulty getting online. So particularly for like the middle school, they'll ask to connect with the Google Classroom to make sure the students are getting their work done. And then for the younger grades, they're also asking to connect with the Seesaw and Google Classroom so that when they're checking in with students for not only just like a wellness check, but they're also checking in about their work.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments from the board? All right, I think that concludes the questions portion. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. And although I do agree with the trustees kind of raised questions about health and finance and that whole piece, I do want to say thank you to these organizations for stepping in, for stepping up, and for being a part of the village that it takes to educate these students. Right now, distance learning is in place. Families are not all adapting in the same way. We have some that are on top of it and we have some that are falling behind. And to be able to provide services like this to families who really need the supports and having organizations in the community that are willing to say, I'll do it. I want to say thank you for stepping in and stepping up. Once again, that is very much connected to the questions, also the accountability piece. I think that's going to be really important. But this makes me happy because I know that families and students who are in need of additional support are going to be receiving them. And I think that we're going to make sure that everything's in place to make sure that healthy procedures are happening and that the finance portion is being worked out. And then I wanted to say also, Trustee Shabomehin, the superintendent approached me about having board members involved in like a budget finance kind of committee task force working group so that we can oversee how money is being spent and create transparency and board input and conversation so we can better understand it and have these types of conversations more in detail. I know you worked on the budget committee last year, so I'll be sending you an email about joining that, given that you have so many great questions. But I know the superintendent and staff are also equally interested in having these challenging conversations, working through them, providing transparency and making sure that every dollar counts. And I know that, you know, as a board, we're always going to be protective of the district, right? When agencies are receiving a lot of money, we want to make sure it's going back to our schools and back to our students. And I also want to also build that accountability piece. So overall, thank you. Let's continue working out some of those questions and details that we spoke about, and let's move forward. So I don't think there are any speakers. I already asked earlier and we didn't have any. So I will entertain a motion to approve this item, which is.
Make a motion to approve this item. the hub.
10A, yes, the learning hubs. Thank you, Trustee Gona. I will second it. Roll call, please.
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
No. I know, it's a surprise.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyona,
Aye.
Trustee Shabomaheen.
I'm sorry, I have a question, and the question is just, is this, we're approving this MOU as is, not necessarily with the proposed changes that were brought up or concerns that were brought up in this conversation?
So which concerns are you talking about? The financial ones? Because they did say they were going to follow up and see how they can incorporate that. Some of that can be incorporated in MOU, and some of that will have to be agreements done. Like I think you talked about an amendment, Will, or addendum or something
Or
along
written statement.
Yeah, something
written.
around like liability or ensuring like certain guidelines or the testing, things like that. So it's like, oh, am I agreeing to this minus those things? Like minus, like, so they don't have to get staff tested or check temperatures or ensure guidelines. And I'm saying, you know, if we say yes, then it's an agreement going forward without those big things. So
I understood we were saying yes, and they were going to follow up on all those things that we discussed.
Some of the, sorry, my internet's being a little laggy right now. Some of the things are, I believe, addressed in the current contract. For example, I don't think we're going to do better on liability. From the financing piece, I think the questions are more around the ACES funding, which is a separate contract than this one. I believe Trustee Wilson's concern was that we have not mandated testing as part of this. We have mandated that parties and partners follow through with all applicable state, county, and local health guidelines. So that would include sanitizing, temperature taking at this point, although those guidelines may of course change. But we do not, just to be clear, what I heard is we need to seek out further agreement with the parties in order to do testing of staff, potentially students and families. Did I sum that up right, everyone? I want to make sure I'm on the same page.
I'm not sure if we can enforce the testing of students and families.
I didn't say, excuse me.
Right.
That's not what I asked. I didn't say students or families.
Right. I'm just clarifying. Yeah.
Sorry.
And I also want to speak out that I know the partners who we're going to be working with are very concerned about their staffers and employees contracting COVID. So I know that they want to do their due diligence to ensure their staff safety as well. And so I would like to get direction from the board if we're requesting them to do the testing, or we encourage them to utilize the city's testing that's offered at our district office.
It's a part of the guidelines right now to follow those procedures. So if that's written in, they have to follow all state, county, local guidelines.
But not testing. Testing is not part of the guidelines.
Unless you have the symptoms.
Well, for me, it's the community. That's, to me, is that we ought to make that a condition because we know that there are 1,000 positive cases in this community.
Does that clarify the question you're asking, Superintendent Sudaria?
Yes. Tony, do you have clarification on if testing is part of the guidelines? That's if they have symptoms. Is that accurate?
So the latest guidelines do recommend testing if you're going to bring students and staff back on campus to do regular testing.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that motion was made and votes were taken, and I don't know, Trustee Shabomaheen, where you were at.
I think it goes without me, passes without me, but yes.
Okay, thank you for voting. Motion carries 4-1. Trustee Wilson voted against. Thank you for that. Let's go to the next item, which is the GAN appropriations limits, resolution 2020-21-6.
Yep, this is, you know, I don't know, 40 years ago or so, California voters approved a resolution requiring the board to adopt a resolution basically saying that we're not going to grow at a certain rate that exceeds the overall rate of government. I believe the limit was intended to limit the rate of government growth. We're required to fill this out every year. It's sort of our routine budget adoption process. Maddie, anything you'd like to add, or trustees, any questions? Or
yes, so basically the concern around 40 years back was that some districts, not only educational district, other government districts, they were spending more money than was expected out of them, and then when it is added to the state, then the state was a kind of, it was a surprise for them that some additional money has been spent by some district which they were not aware of. So then this gain limit was put. Now this is saying that we either have to say our expenses are within those limits, and which in this case today are. So where our expenses are within those limits. But had it not been the case, and our expenses were higher, then the resolution would have been a little different. Today, we don't have to do anything, just pass this resolution and send it to the county. If our expenses were higher than those limits, a different resolution would have come, and the additional expenses that we would have incurred, then we will have to send out a letter to Department of Finance in the California to tell them as to how much we have exceeded our limit. So this is now a way of letting the state know that whether we are spending within our limit or going beyond. So today we are confirming that our expenses were within our limit.
I think that sort of sums up our presentation if there are any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board for 10B? Do we have any speakers?
No speakers.
All right, I'll entertain a motion if there are no speakers.
Through the chair, I'll make a motion to approve item 10B.
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
Aye.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyona,
Aye.
Trustee Shabal-Maheen.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries 5-0. That will take us to item 10C, which is the 2020-21 unaudited actual financial reports.
Sorry, I think that's it's the 1920 unaudited actuals. Budgets and spending I view as a story of a district's priorities and values over time. And I'm looking forward to sort of the journey of telling you that story over the next, years and years and years. This is a little bit of sort of an awkward time for me. I'm telling a story that I wasn't here for. The fiscal year closed before I joined the district formally, but I'm going to do my best to tell the story here. And I want to just, before I begin, I believe most of you have met Mehdi at this point. He just explained, I think, the GAN appropriations limit much better than I certainly could have at this point. And this is sort of, I think, in many ways, his story that I have the credit to tell a bit about this at this point. So let me dive in just by sort of giving you some top line numbers here. And again, we're talking about sort of the last year, a little bit of history here. So our expenses last year increased slightly and our revenues decreased slightly. We ran in the prior year, 18-19, a fairly large surplus, but with sort of an increase in expenditure and a decrease in revenue that did lead to a deficit in FY 19-20. Now, I don't believe at this point, with what we know, we have structural concerns to worry about, or structural concerns that we haven't addressed at this point. I'm sure you all know, I think far better than I do, but part of the reason that we took action on closing 2 schools last year was to address some of the structural concerns. And that sort of change is not necessarily addressed in the actual expenditures from 1920 when those schools were still open. So at this point, we've identified a couple of, I would say, sort of timing quirks that reflect, I think, are sort of the driving cause of the deficit that we see in this year. And we'll sort of walk you through how we got there by specifically comparing the 18-19 expenditures to the 19-20 expenditures. The other thing I'll add here is, we're working on, as I sort of said earlier, telling our story here. And as Trustee Polito mentioned, we are looking to form some kind of budget working group where we'll be able to explore and hash out and really work through these issues together and work on improving the budget accuracy of the current fiscal year, which we're excited to tell you about in sort of early December as part of our interim budget update #1. And we're also beginning budgeting for FY 21-22 earlier than I think we have in recent memory. And I'm excited to tell you about sort of our projections for those fiscal years. I'll also add, as we sort of talk through 3 fiscal years or so, all of this work is happening against the backdrop of a pandemic, which just means that things are changing certainly more quickly than I've ever seen in education from a finance perspective. And I think my colleagues would certainly say from an academic and operational perspective as well. But basically, we're seeing pretty significant changes to both our revenue and expenditure estimates on a certainly month-to-month basis, and sometimes even week-to-week, and sometimes it even feels like day-to-day basis. So let's walk through, just starting with our revenue side. As mentioned earlier, we did see our revenue decrease from 45.6 million to about 42.8 million. I'd call attention to a couple of things here. So one, our LCFF revenue decreased, and that's largely just a function of our enrollment. As you all know, our enrollment has been declining for some time, and that led to a decrease in our state sort of LCFF money. The sort of 2 things that are circled here, one is the other state revenue, and the other is federal revenue. The other state revenue, this decline, I don't think anyone should be particularly concerned about for a couple of reasons. Most of the decline here is due to the end of 2 state funding formula, 2 state grants, both of which were on the revenue and the expenditure side. So as they phased out, there was a decrease in revenue, but a corresponding decrease in expenditure, sort of what I sometimes refer to as like a solve yourself grant, right? So while there was a decrease in revenue matched by the decrease in expenditure, there's no financial issues there. Of course, there are programmatic concerns of whatever those grants were going to. From a accounting perspective, we're okay there. The other thing that's going to come up a couple times in this presentation is Prop 39, which allowed us to do some energy enhancements. It was a one-time grant. There's a bit of an accounting quirk here where we recorded the revenue in 18-19, but the expenditures in 19-20. And so what that effectively does is it makes 18-19 look a little bit better and 19-20 look a little bit worse. And so as you keep that in mind, and if you think about this as sort of a 2-year budget process, you start to feel a little bit better about that budget deficit. Our local revenue, you'll notice, jumped about 53%. Most of that is due to the $1.5 million grant to purchase CNG buses. And there's some other sort of small accounting quirks we can talk through, but nothing sort of major that explains the jump there. Notably, a lot of this increase was actually not due to REF funding increases, even though I think the overall REF budget changed a bit during this time. That's not actually what the jump here is reflecting. And finally, and again, this is relevant to sort of the overall big picture story here, which is why it got circled. We saw a $1.9 million decrease in our federal revenue. This, a couple of years ago, we had some issues with some of our federal programs, specifically the title programs. We're sort of working our way through some of that, and we really want to make sure that we're using all of those resources efficiently, effectively, and really not letting sort of any money go to waste or leave any money on the table. We fully intend to get this number up. We believe that over time, we have a little bit of time to get this right. We'll end up making this 0.6 number look quite a bit larger, a little bit closer to what we anticipated in our most recent interim budget update for the last fiscal year. So we think this is a bit of a quirk. And there is, of course, some decline here due to our decline in enrollment. Federal funds are a function in many ways of our enrollment. And as our enrollment declines, we will see our federal funding decrease over time as well. Any questions on the revenue side of the house? I'll keep moving just to talk through some of the expenditures here. Overall, our expenditures, as I mentioned, went up. Part of the story here is actually, frankly, a positive one and one that I'd like to see continue. And that's specifically instruction and instruction-related costs overall going up slightly, which is impressive at a time of declining enrollment, and our general administration costs going down. That's generally a nice thing to see in a district. Now, the general administration costs, that's mainly gone down for two reasons. One is a 400,000 or so reduction in our legal costs last year. And the second would be a reduction in one-time staffing costs. This was some severance pay and other sort of employee-related matters in the district office here. Of course, our total spending here did increase, and that's largely due to the sort of plant services line. And that's really due to two things. One is there was a one-time purchase of those CNG buses. As mentioned on the previous slide, they were fully funded by a grant, and so no real hit to the bottom line there. And the other is, as mentioned before, the Prop 39 expenditures showed up here in FY 19-20, while the revenue showed up in 18-19. Now, of course, with our declining enrollment, increasing expenditure does mean that we're spending more per student, which is investment I'm happy to make, but also one that does sort of address or does raise some of the long-term concerns. And so I do think that our steps taken to reduce our costs by increasing some of our school sizes through the reduction of those two schools was, as I see it from this perspective, a fairly prudent fiscal move. And one that is not necessarily reflected on this slide, which looks at expenditures for last year. Any questions on sort of how we spent money last year, or I can sort of talk about the sort of overall balance. One thing I neglected to mention on the revenue side that does show up on the expenditure side, there, as mentioned before, part of this fiscal year includes the pandemic, and there were federal funds that were going to address some of the pandemic spending. We estimate about $500,000 in expenditures were not necessarily reimbursed, but will be reimbursed from this fiscal year. Due to some of the accounting quirks of when that money will come in, we'll likely see the COVID-related funds in FY 2021. So more sort of good news, I think, there. So as mentioned on the first slide, we did run a fairly large surplus of about $3.5 million in FY 18-19. We did run a $2 million deficit in FY 19-20. Now, part of that, as I mentioned, was Prop 39. Prop 39, revenue accrued in FY 18-19, and then the expenditures accrued in FY 19-20. If you kind of move the revenue to this year, you move the expenses to this year, it starts to sort of shrink the surplus in 18-19 and also shrink the deficit in 19-20. And we talk about the additional funding coming in, both the additional title funding coming in and also the potential COVID funding coming in. It doesn't affect 18-19 at all, but it does make the story a little bit more positive here in FY 19-20. I think overall, we certainly ran a deficit. I want to be clear about that, but I do think that the story moving forward is a positive one. And I do think that the district does not appear to have, at least in the immediate short term, reflected by this deficit, sort of big structural issues. Although I think there's certainly ways, as we discussed earlier, to think about our spending a little bit more carefully, and also I think more thoughtfully and transparently. And I think moving forward in the short term, we also need to address the fact that our enrollment is declining, and that has a number of complicating factors here in the district. Any questions on the unaudited actuals? I'll then sort of turn to talk a little bit about some of the budget timeline for the rest of the year, as the other times you're going to see me talking about some of our numbers in this group, although again, looking forward to talking to many of you, either one-on-one conversations during our budget working group. Take the silence and keep moving.
Good job.
I heard the noise in the last section, so I know that you're not necessarily shy as a group of asking questions when they come up. So as I mentioned at the onset here, we are thinking about sort of 3 different fiscal years at once right now. And that's not to include the long-term modeling that we're also working on here, but just short-term, we are working on, now that Mehdi's done, I would describe as heroic work to get you these unaudited actuals. We're turning the unaudited into audited, and we're bringing the auditors in to look at things. Now, just so you know, normally you would see these at the end of December. This year, the state's given a bit of an extension to all districts, not just us, on getting you audited actuals. And so, I think you can expect to see the final results sometime in early spring, which is a little bit different than past years, but nothing to be alarmed about. This is a practice that all districts are doing, in part just because it's a lot harder to audit these things remotely. We're also, as I mentioned, working on the SY 2021 budget. This is a very different fiscal year than I think some of us anticipated, certainly 2 years ago, and certainly at the start of the pandemic, and even I think in the summer. So as we learn more, we're working sort of, I think, nimbly, I would say, to really spend our COVID funds responsibly, accountably, and transparently. Room for improvement, obviously, and that's what we're working towards, but we're working on getting a much more robust budget picture for interim update 1, which will include a lot of the federal funding, a lot of our COVID response pieces, and also just some observations on our general fiscal health. And of course, we'll update you sort of later in the spring as we get a better picture, an even better picture of how our spending is actually unfolding. And finally, I want to let you know that we're also thinking about SY 21-22. It's never too early to plan for next school year's budget. I'm still learning about how we've done things in the past, but I certainly have a desire to get our budgets done very early in the winter. Again, as I think we mentioned earlier, it's going to be tricky with some of the enrollment forecasts, but I don't think that tricky should stop us. We need to come up with a reasonable budget. We need to get those budgets to department owners as soon as possible. We need to make sure that we have spending plans, not just for our general funds, but for our title funds. For COVID funds, we need to have plans in place to address any kind of anticipated learning loss. We need to address budget inequities where we find them. We need to make sure that we're not double counting. Maybe it's BGCP funds, we're only giving it to them once, and we're giving it to them exactly where they have their most impact, as mentioned earlier. So our goal really is to come up with a really robust budget, and that just is going to take some time. So I'm looking forward to having a number of conversations with you about our budget, potentially a lot earlier than you've seen them in the past. And of course, as we get more and more guidance from the state about what the revenue picture will look like for SY 21-22, we'll sort of try and land the plane a little bit by taking sort of their forecasts and our forecasts and merging and adjusting and merging and adjusting and merging and adjusting until we release the sort of final budget in summer. Any questions about the timeline of the unaudited actuals? Wonderful.
So through the chair.
Yes, trustee
I
Wilson.
just want to say thank you, especially to Mehdi for doing all this work. I know he's had to bring Will up to speed as well as keep on top of everything that's going. So I just want to personally say thank you for all of his hard work that I know he put in to making this come before us tonight.
Thank you, trustee Wilson. Any other questions or comments regarding this presentation?
We do have a speaker.
Okay. Let's hear from our speaker.
So Rhonda White, and she should be able to speak right now. You're on mute, Rhonda.
Good evening, Superintendent Sudaria, Board President and trustees and members of the community. My name is Rhonda White. I'm the Ravenswood Teachers Association President. I just had a couple questions for Will about the budget. Just wondering if with these unaudited actuals, I noticed they're a little different from what we've seen in the previous years, and maybe I just missed it, but I didn't see anything that noted classified or certificated or management salaries or benefits, and any type of cost savings or additions that we had from the 1920 to the 2021 school year, as well as I didn't see any notations about substitute costs as well as transportation. Thank you.
I believe a lot of the, and I might be missing something here, but I believe a lot of the in the agenda online attachment, there should be a document that's a PDF that details out a lot of those tables. I didn't include that in the presentation here. I tried to focus a little bit on a higher level set of topics, but for those of you, including Ms. White, who are interested in learning sort of more of the specifics here, I believe those tables are online in the same format that they have been in prior years. Mehdi, is that right?
Yes, I think in the past, maybe it was the presentation which would have been done differently. Maybe this is what has happened, and I myself don't know how it was done in the past. So if you want, we could look at the past and then come back as to how it was done and do that same kind of presentation. But because there are two kinds of presentations here, one was this, the macro level presentation, just look at overall picture, and then there are those fund statements. So every detail, every bit of detail in different ways is being presented there.
I'll check the thorough PDF, correct. I'll check it, and if I have any questions, I'll get back with you. Thank you.
I believe we're talking tomorrow morning, Ms. White, so I'm sure I can answer any of those questions.
Yes,
then.
we are.
All right, so once again, that was available as part of one of the attachments to the, so that was made available to the public. Is there any other questions or comments or speakers? Let's see, any other speakers?
No other speakers?
All right, and there are no other questions or comments from the board as I hear silence, so I will entertain a motion to approve 10C.
Through the chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make the motion that we approve of the 2020-2021 unaudited actuals.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
President Polito,
Aye.
Vice President Wilson,
Aye.
Trustee Fitch,
Aye.
Trustee Guyona,
Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Gaona had to leave at approximately 9:35 p.m. She did let me know, so let the record show she had to step away.
Trustee Shibomihi,
Aye.
So the motion carries 4-0. Okay. Did I freeze up again? I froze up again.
Mehdi.
Anna's gone again.
Yeah, she left the meeting.
She froze or something. Trustee Polito.
Oh, right, she froze again.
Yeah, she's frozen.
Okay. So the next thing is the 11, the Board of Trustees. We have nobody who's absent, so we don't need to deal with A. B is the lactitious accommodation. Lactation accommodation. I know what that is. Gina?
It's just the first read for the board.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about it or discussions? Hearing none, so this is just the first reading. So it's just a report, okay? Next is, anybody have any board reports or communication?
I actually do.
Okay.
Trustee Wilson, thank you. I actually just want to put it out there that I cannot make the ongoing meetings for the committee because it has a new name. I can't remember the new name.
School Improvement Working Group.
Exactly, due to a new work schedule that I have this fall. And so I just wanted to add, if someone else on the board wants to be on the committee, please, you can have my seat, or I can stay and try to go when I can. But since, yeah, I can't make it. Can't make most of them. So yeah, so no pressure here. But if anybody wants to ping me or the superintendent, please do. Okay.
So I'm still on that committee until November.
Mhm.
I'm just saying. Okay, so if there isn't anything else, our next regular board meeting will be September 24th, 2020. Okay? So now the meeting will be adjourned at 9:48. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anna tried to get back in, but couldn't, just so you know.
Okay.
Thank you all. See you later.
Bye.
Thank you, Solomon. Thanks, Gina.
Good job.
Yeah, bye, y'all.
Bye.
And thank you, Tony and Will and Cynthia and Laura and Jennifer. And everybody. I was like, wait a minute, I didn't say everybody. Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Betty, thank you. Have a good night. Yeah, yeah.